Hi guys, welcome to our first video on our class novel or studied fiction, The Weight of Water. So today we're going to focus on the 10 different aspects that you need to focus on when it comes to obviously learning and then revising for your summer assessment. So what you need to do is you need to have a piece of paper in front of you and hopefully a pen that works, and you jot down the keywords as I'm going through the 10 different aspects or 10 different features. Okay, so remember you can stop and start the video as many times as you like, obviously once you have viewed it straight through. Okay, so The Weight of Water is our study novel, so therefore you need to know key aspects of it. So the first thing that you're going to focus on is the author of the novel, who is Sarah Crossan. And I'll give you just some key facts then relating to Sarah Crossan, and you can memorize those. The next aspect or feature of the novel then will be the title and the cover. Okay, so I know some of you are finding it quite difficult, of course, to access it. I'm just accessing it via Kindle, and I have it on Audible as well, because obviously my book is still in KH. Okay, so don't worry about having to get it read this week or even next week. Just read it in stages. Maybe you say when you get it first, read through it very quickly to establish, we'd say, plot, characters, basic understanding of the storyline. And then maybe read through it a second time then, and you'll have a greater awareness and a greater understanding then of themes and style. Okay, so number one is author. Number two then is the title and the cover. So we have to discuss why the author has used this particular title and why she, in this case, has chosen this specific cover, or why the publishing company, of course, has decided to use this particular cover. Now remember, covers will vary. Okay, so this is the one that I'm going to be focusing on just as an example, but you can analyze and you can scrutinize, of course, the one that you have or the one that you were using. Okay, number three then on our list is genre. Remember, genre, of course, originally a French word meaning type or kind. So what kind of novel is it? Okay, is it, for example, science fiction, adventure, romance? Okay, remember there are so many different types of novels out there. We have to try and identify this particular genre or type. So that's number three. Number four, then we're going to focus on the characters. Okay, so we have a main character or protagonist, Kasienka, in this particular novel. So we can focus on her, we can look at her appearance, we can look at her background, her family. We can also look, of course, at personality traits, characteristics as such. And then later on, when we're looking at style, we look at how she is portrayed, how she is created by the author or writer. So that's number four. Obviously, when we're looking at characters, we have to look at how characters relate to one another. So we have to look at family relationships or family dynamic or friendships or incidental, peripheral characters, characters on the margin, perhaps we'd say. Okay, so that's number four then, character. Number five then is plot and storyline. So when you're reading through this particular novel, you kind of think, oh, maybe it's kind of meandering or rambling a little bit. Not that much happens. It's quite matter of fact at times. It's quite realistic as such then. It's just a couple of dramatic moments, maybe a climax, we'd say, a high point halfway through. And there's a resolution of sorts then towards the end. But it's not jam-packed, sort of full of action as such, really. The character or the character's relationships tend to be more important, really, than the storyline or the plot. But we still have to analyse the plot as such. Okay, so that's number five, remember, plot. Number six then would be themes or issues as such. So if we think about the word theme, of course, it means a central idea. So what's the point behind the novel? What is Sarah Crossan, the author, trying to communicate to us? Is there a moral as such? Is she communicating something meaningful, something important? And when we look at Sarah Crossan's other novels, we realise, of course, that there are common themes, essentially. So the theme of friendship features very strongly in Sarah Crossan's novel. The theme of family relationships or family dynamics. that would feature. Also, identity, essentially. Who is this character? Where does she come from? Okay, who does she want to be? So identity is very important. An issue would be, we say, something that is very urgent or something that is very pressing. So it could be like a general issue, like we'd say immigration or bullying. Okay, so that could be a particular issue or a particular theme then when it comes to this particular novel. Right, so that's number 6 then, themes. Number 7 then would be the style of the novel. So how is it written? So when we first open it up, of course, we realize that we have different parts of the novel, different sections, and we have a multitude of chapters as well. The chapters tend to be quite short and condensed, and we kind of wonder why. Okay, is the action moving very, very quickly, essentially? Is Kasyanka growing up very quickly? We're moving, of course, from one particular episode to the next. Is it sort of episodic then? We're moving sort of day to day, week to week. Okay, so does time pass very quickly or does time pass very, very slowly? So the style, of course, is actually going to be very important just in terms of, we'd say, how the novel is written. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the structure of the novel then as well. The language, the dialogue that is used. What does dialogue reveal about a particular character or about a particular relationship? Okay, what does the description reveal about a particular event or a particular character? So when we first open the novel then, of course, and begin to read it, we realise, of course, that it's not written in conventional paragraphs, prose. It's actually written in verse, poetry. So the whole book is one long poem. And we find this kind of very disconcerting at first, and we sort of think, why would anybody do that? But it's actually a long history of that, the most famous one being John Milton's poem, which is, of course, a book, Paradise Lost. Okay, so we have to kind of think about, right, there has to be a reason for this, and we have to tease out different reasons, of course, and different ideas pertaining to the style of the novel itself. Okay, so we'll have to look at characterization then, obviously how the characters are depicted or portrayed. Okay, we can look, of course, then at, we'd say, the high point of the novel, the dramatic elements within the novel then as well. Okay, so that is number 7 then, okay, looking at the style of the novel. Number 8 then, and this is what we'll be focusing, of course, on when we're first kind of dipping into the novel, the opening, essentially. What does the opening actually tell us about plot, about character, about theme, and about style? Okay, so is this a successful opening or not? Sometimes, of course, you'll have a prologue at the very beginning of the novel. Sometimes you will have a flashback or a flash forward. And then at the very end of this particular novel, moving on to number 9, focusing on the ending itself, we noted that it's an epilogue, and we'll be looking at what an epilogue is and why it is used. Okay, so number 7 was style. Number 8 then was opening. Number 9 is ending. And then finally, to tie it all up, number 10 is personal response. Now, personal response is actually very important because here we'll be looking at your specific ideas, okay, your reaction to the novel on a very basic level. Did you enjoy the novel? Did you not? If you did, why? If you didn't, then why didn't you enjoy it? Okay, so your personal response. Are there any criticisms, perhaps? Would you like to critique the novel? Any advice that you could give the novelist or the author as such? Would you adapt this particular novel? Okay, would it, we'd say, be a successful TV series or maybe a theatre play? Could it be a film? Okay, does it really suit that? So you have to kind of think about aspects of that particular point then, which is number 10, your personal response. So you're free then to include anything essentially when it comes to your personal response. But remember, of course, that you need to be imaginative and creative, okay, when it comes to personal response. Right, so we have our 10 features or 10 aspects. So the first thing that we're going to do then is we're going to have a quick look at Sarah Crossan herself. Okay, so back to number 1 then, the author Sarah Crossan. So she is an Irish author, okay, but she was educated in England. She was educated in Cambridge University, which is a very prestigious university. So she identifies as a YA fiction writer. So remember that YA stands for young adult. Although, of course, a lot of kind of younger children, preteens, would read her books as well. So actually, she has a new book coming out in August, and this is her first foray into adult territory. So she's finally writing for adults, essentially. So it's out in August of this particular year, fingers crossed, and it's called Here is the Beehive. Okay, so we kind of think about it, when we look at the titles of her novels, they don't give an awful lot away. Okay, we have to kind of investigate further, and we have to kind of think and be inquisitive and sort of think to ourselves, okay, why does she use those particular titles? They're a little bit obscure, or they're a bit cryptic as such. Okay, her most recent book was Toffee, and this outlined the story of a young girl from a troubled background. She had an abusive father, she ran away from home, and then she forges a very important and meaningful relationship, then a vital relationship or friendship with an older woman who has dementia. Okay, so you kind of think, oh, okay, I'm kind of recognizing some of the themes here, essentially. Once more, family life, family dynamic, essentially. Okay, the interpersonal relationships. Friendship features very strongly. And then obviously identity as well. We have a young girl who's growing up, trying to find her feet, trying to find her way in the world, essentially, trying to decide who she is and what she wants. Okay? So if we think about it, then there are lots of parallels between her most recent book, Toffee, and then this particular book, The Weight of Water. Okay, anything else that we know about Sarah Crossan? Well, basically she is also the author of Apple and Rain and One. I know some of you have read those particular novels for the Accelerated Reader Programme. So once more, they dealt, of course, with family relationships and friendship and kind of social issues as well that we kind of touch on when we're looking at The Weight of Water. And in 2018, then Sarah Crossan became the Irish Children's Laureate, which is an award then that's bestowed upon a particular writer. It could be a poet, could be a playwright, could be a novelist in this case, obviously. So she becomes sort of the official sort of children's writer then of Ireland. Okay, so she has a degree in philosophy and literature. Okay, and she's also qualified then to teach drama and literature as well. So it kind of makes sense, essentially, you know, that she studied philosophy, which is basically, of course, if you think about study of different ideas and thoughts. And then she obviously, of course, became a teacher, and then, of course, a writer as well. So there's kind of a natural evolution or sort of trajectory, essentially, there too. Okay, so that's Sarah Crossan. So maybe do a little bit more research on Sarah Crossan. See, can you find out any sort of interesting facts? Maybe have a look at YouTube, look at some of the interviews that she has conducted, we'd say, online. You could maybe Google a couple of the interviews then in terms of with the Irish Times, for example, just given a couple of interviews there, or maybe the Guardian or the Irish Independent as well. Okay, and find out maybe something that's a little bit more interesting and maybe something that you can relate back to your reading of the novel as well. Because think about it, she's an Irish writer, but she's writing about a Polish girl in The Weight of Water who comes to England to live in Coventry. And you kind of think, okay, well, that's kind of odd, maybe a little bit strange that she's not writing about an Irish girl or somebody who comes to Ireland, essentially. So why does she do that? Because maybe, of course, she knows England very well, and maybe she's writing about something topical, okay, about refugees, or about acceptance and tolerance and so on. So you have to kind of think about, we'd say, what motivates these particular writers and why they choose the subjects and themes that they do. Okay, so moving on then to number 2, which is the title and the cover, because obviously they're interlinked here. So just looking at this particular cover then, we notice, of course, a very simple colour scheme. It's quite limited, but we notice contrasting colours as well. So we kind of think of the title itself, The Weight of Water, and then water features very prominently then when it comes to the cover itself. So we have the blue and white. And when we're reading through the book, we realise, of course, that the water is associated with a swimming pool. But obviously, when we're looking at the cover, we don't know that. So we gain a greater understanding then, obviously, when we're reading through the book itself. So the blue represents, perhaps we say, the water of a swimming pool, could represent the ocean or the sea. And we notice the drops or droplets here. So this could, of course, indicate rain, but does it also indicate maybe the idea of tears and sadness as well? When we're reading through the book, Kasyanka complains about the fact that it rains too much in England and she doesn't have a pair of wellies, for example, and she has to make do with her snow boots because she's coming from Poland, of course, where snow essentially would be more commonplace. So it's sort of emphasizing the notion then of water itself, okay, and then what water actually represents for Kasyanka. And then the notion of tears, perhaps because she's been forced to leave home. And then the tears obviously indicating not just her sadness, but the sadness then of other refugees or other immigrants, essentially, or her mother, of course, and her mother's relationship with her father as well. Okay, so we have the contrast then between the blue and the white. And remember, of course, that blue is a very natural colour as well. We think of white, of course, being associated with pureness and freshness and maybe innocence. Might suggest the idea of a new beginning or the innocence of the character Kasyanka herself. Like I said, it could just be the interior of a swimming pool, essentially, the blue of the water, the white tiles that we normally associate with swimming pools. And then we have this unusual image here then of a red suitcase. So the suitcase would suggest the idea of a journey or a voyage, essentially. And we do encounter the image of the suitcase, of course, at the airport at the very beginning in the first chapter of the novel itself. So the suitcase is red then, and we're going to think, okay, red. Normally that would suggest something to do with love. Could it be romance? Could it be friendship? Could red be an indication of danger, though? And we do know, of course, that Kasyanka goes through a lot of, we'd say, traumatic experiences then in the novel. Okay, could it be love for her homeland, her home place, Gdansk in Poland? And then the idea of the teardrops then associated with the sadness of the leave-taking, the departure, having to leave her home place behind and everyone that she knew and loved, apart from her mother. Because we notice, of course, that superimposed on the image of the suitcase then is a heart with an arrow through it. So that would suggest the idea of pain and suffering, the idea of heartbreak or homesickness, perhaps, as well. Okay, so an interesting cover then. Some of the covers that I've seen feature actually just a character or a figure, like a silhouette, floating in a swimming pool. So if you think that's more literal, that's more obvious then, whereas this is much more symbolic or a little bit more obscure then, just in terms of the symbolism, okay, what all of these images represent. Okay, so we can associate then the images or imagery used then, of course, in tandem with the actual title itself. Okay, so we think of water, first of all. Well, water can be benign, can be good, because obviously it's necessary for life. It's very refreshing. It's also associated with cleansing, with hygiene, with purity. Water can be associated with renewal. If we think of a baptism ceremony, so it has a religious connotation. Okay. Water then, of course, can also be associated with something malign, something dangerous or harmful, because literally can be associated, of course, with drowning or death as well. Okay, if we think of something simple like flooding, okay, so climate change or climate crisis, something like that as well. Okay, as I said before, of course, the water can be associated then with tears, with suffering, or with heartache. Okay, if you think of the idea that water can be associated with buoyancy, kind of floating. So maybe the idea of, we'd say, Kasyanka saving herself. Then we think of the title in its entirety, the weight of water. So is the water a burden? Is it pressure? Is it something that perhaps oppresses her, something negative? Or is it like a pun? The weight of water, W-A-I-T, is the water waiting for her like a safe place or a refuge. So when she goes swimming, she feels free. Okay, it's like a little haven then, the swimming pool, where she can escape all of her problems, all of her difficulties when it comes to her family, when it comes to, of course, the friendships that she's trying to forge, when it comes to her romantic relationship with the character William as well. Okay, so lots of different ideas then associated with not just the cover and the colour and the image itself, but also then the actual title. Okay, and notice that we have the red here, of course, when it comes to the bag or the suitcase, and then we have the red when it comes to Sarah Crossan's name as well. Nice contrast. Because after all, of course, think about it, that old saying, don't judge a book by its cover. We all do, though. If you're browsing in a bookshop or a library, essentially, you're going to be drawn towards certain books because of the title, maybe because of the author, if you're familiar with the author, or maybe simply down to the actual cover itself, how appealing or how attractive it is. Okay, so food for thought, guys. Obviously today we just focused on our 10 different aspects or features, the author, Sarah Crossan, and then the title and cover of the novel. So on Tuesday then, I'll move on then to points number 3 and 4, possibly number 5, just depending on how much time we have, okay? So don't forget, if you want to ask me questions, you can email me or you can post questions underneath this particular video as well. So until Tuesday, guys, take care.